All right, just so kind of lay out what we're going to be doing the rest of the morning before lunch, I'm giving a little talk about small business SaaS adoption based on research that actually Neil and I both have worked on over the past few years. Then we're going to have a few of us come up and kind of have a panel conversation about how new technology adoption is impacting the small business market and sort of how companies in this room should adapt to it and so on. So I think I'll just get started and hopefully the room's pretty full. I don't know. I think I don't need Lynn because I think this seems to be working. So we'll just get rolling. Anyway, so welcome back. As you all know me, I'm Charles. I've been here the whole time. But unlike Neil, I did not do a bio slide. But I'll tell you kind of a little bit of my background. Currently I'm an independent consultant. I'm also a senior analyst for the LSA. I edit the LSA Insider blog and produce their podcast and help with the event that Neil mentioned earlier. I also am a partner with Paul in Big Five Digital, which is a Africa Middle East events business, and of course I consult with Alsma on this event. So that sort of describes my business life. But is one of the things that we've done with LSA, and Neil was sort of kind of the impetus for this. He gets. Yeah, well. But the idea was we were starting to see the evolution of apps, the app ecosystem in the small business space. And we're starting to see companies coming into the small business arena that were developing relationships with small businesses that hadn't really existed before. So companies that aggregated small businesses suddenly had to sort of widen their field of vision to look at a wider competitive field. So we decided we should start measuring it. So anyway, we've done 4 waves of research, and what I'm going to talk about is 3. I'm going to share the latest data, which is a few months old, but a lot of you probably haven't seen it. And I'm going to sort of outline what we're learning from it. And 3 basic themes here that I'm going to talk about. One is sort of documenting how the small business march into the cloud is taking place and how it's sort of generationally segmented to a large degree. Talk about how SMEs are benefiting from the shift, what they're expecting from it and what their actual outcomes are. And then talk about how this small business adoption of cloud technology is signaling that the way we're going to be selling to small businesses may be changing fairly dramatically in the coming, it actually already is, but it will be changing even more dramatically in the future. What I didn't mention in here is another finding that we've discerned from both the data and from other research we've done with small businesses, which is that there is also a point of friction around adoption of the technology and actually getting small businesses to engage in it. I'm leaving it out of this presentation because this afternoon Jasmine and I are going to speak to that subject as well. So anyway, getting right into it. So what we call the Modern Commerce Monitor, which Neil mentioned in his previous discussion about thinking like an app. Something we've been doing, actually we used to call it the Tech Adoption Index. We recently renamed it as the Modern Commerce Monitor. We've done 4 waves since 2017, and we do 1,000 completes-ish, give or take. We actually go over it a little bit every time per wave, and we define small businesses as 500 or fewer, and we weight it based on census data. And we completed a wave in April, and I'm showing you that data. We'll be doing another wave early in the year in advance of the LSA Locology event in March. And anyway, so the idea is to just understand what technologies, cloud technologies, small businesses are adopting and what outcomes they're getting from that. And just to note, it's always important when you come to an international conference to be upfront about whether you're using international or US North American data. This is US data. I will say we're very open to conversations with anyone who's interested in mirroring this survey in their own markets. I'm happy to discuss how to go about that. So anyway, let's get right into it. So this is the landscape that we were talking about when we talk about measuring small business tech adoption. It's basically the notion that small businesses are using apps to run their businesses across the full enterprise, for everything from acquiring customers, retaining customers, managing those customer relationships, the customer data, through to collecting the money, invoicing, accounting, point of sale, and all the data that's collected through point of sale and how that's repurposed. Handling your payroll and your employee benefits and all this, and productivity. You can look at Slack down there. So these are all sort of examples of apps that fit within this broader ecosystem. So it's what's interesting about this, and what makes it most interesting to us, is that each of these has sort of a core offering. Cabbage is they lend money to small businesses, and they do it through an online platform. Yoko actually is a South African company. It's a sort of a nod to my work with Big Five. They're sort of the Square of South Africa. Keep is a CRM. Gusto is an HR platform. QuickBooks, I think we all know what that is. And so on and so on. Each of these has a core offering, but then they're adding services onto that core offering over time that are adjacent to their original purpose. Cabbage, I think just launched a payments platform, for example. QuickBooks does payroll, and so on. If you look at any of these, they all add things on that expand their service. The idea being to have more share of that customer. So that's the battle that's happening going forward, and that's why it's relevant to anyone who aggregates small businesses, because they're now, instead of having the other directory company or a digital agency as their primary competitive field, it could easily be Square, or it could easily be QuickBooks or Gusto or any of these. So that's kind of why we found it interesting to measure small business tech adoption. Okay. So let's kind of look at where we are today with tech adoption. So right now, about half of small businesses are using some sort of tool, cloud-based tool, to do something in their business. We've estimated that by 2021, that number will be 75%. So the march has been steady, and we expect 3/4 will have at least one thing in their business environment that they're using an app for. Maybe it's invoicing. Maybe it's accounting or payments or HR, or maybe it's something more in what we call the front office, customer acquisition, marketing automation, that's a SaaS-based tool. Increasingly, where there's one, in the future there will be many. So what we've measured, again, about half of those who don't currently use anything, they're all pen and paper, or they're all desktop software, or whatever it is. 49% of non-users plan to add something in the future. So eventually they will be cloud users. Oops, there's been a lot of that today. 65% of those who do use something plan to add more services in the future. So, even the non-users will be adopting in the future, and those who do have cloud tools, Duran mentioned 4 apps within their ecosystem, maybe it'll be 5, 6, in the future, because as you use a few cloud tools, you become more and more comfortable and you add more on. There's a strong, so what we did here, this requires a little bit of explanation. We developed something out of this called the Cloud-Based Services Buyer Index, and what that basically does is we look at different segments within the survey, generational segments, business, like startup growth mode, that sort of business phase. What business phase are you in? Are you, just sort of mature, hanging on to what you have? Did you just launch the business in your, aggressive hustler growth mode? Are you just a solo shop, or do you have employees? What problems keep you up at night? When we ask companies, are the challenges that you worry about most acquiring customers, finding time to, chase all the opportunities? Or are you worried about sort of things like taxes, regulation, the economy, sort of things you can control versus things you can't control? What we discovered is, on the left side, these are the people who were over-indexed to adopt cloud tools. These are Gen Ys, millennials and younger. Boomers and silents are under-indexed for cloud adoption. Companies that are in startup and growth mode are using cloud tools to run their businesses. Typically a company that's a solo shop with no employees, much less likely to be using the cloud. Companies that are in a mature business phase, et cetera. So, the ones on the right, really, there's not a whole lot going on in their businesses. These are the ones that, have ambition and growth objectives and so on. And they're using the cloud to run their business. Benefiting from the shift. So I don't know what this guy's doing, but he's apparently benefiting from the shift. At any rate, so with the latest wave, the first 3 waves we said, we're measuring the adoption of the cloud, but we weren't measuring anything about what happened after they, started using cloud-based point of sale or accounting or payroll or whatever. So we asked why they were doing it, but we didn't ask what happened after they bought it. So in the latest wave, we added that to the conversation. And so we had, so what happened after? Did it meet your expectations? Are the things you expected from it happening? And we found that for the most part that they are. So 81% who, moved something from pen and paper into an app did so because they wanted to save time, add efficiency to their business. That's, Elise mentioned that in her conversation yesterday. And I think that's a common thing of anyone who spends much time talking to small businesses, hears this all the time, is that the pain point is a lack of time. Their most valuable resource is time, and their most scarce resource is time. So if you can help them win back some of that time to use it, whether it's to spend time with their kids or make more money or whatever it is, they want that time and they want you to help them get it. And they expect that from technology, and that's why they're adopting it. So what we asked is, by segment, and we sort of segment the research by these elements of running your business, or aspects of running your business. So we asked them, did the cloud tool you bought to fulfill this function meet or exceed expectations? Was it about what you expected, or was it below expectations? And what we found is that for the most part, it either met or better or much better than expected. So all of them were above 50%. Point of sale was at the highest end, CRM was at the lowest end. We also asked, which sort of failed. And the highest numbers for that, which I don't share here, but I can tell you, were the last two, marketing, advertising, and CRM. So those two, still had in positive territory, but probably had the most negative ratings. But nonetheless, overall, most of them said, yeah, I got this thing to save time, make money, get more data insights, whatever reason they cited. Most of them said, yeah, it's working. And so what do you do with all this extra time or, that you have? And what we found is, it's a little complicated to explain how we collected this data, but basically 60% of the cloud SMBs, those that use tools, cloud tools, apps to run their business, some element of their business, 60% of them are spending 50 to 75% of their time on revenue-facing activities, selling or servicing customers, whereas only 24% of non-cloud users spend that much time on what we would consider revenue-generating activities. So basically, that time seems to be shifted into productive revenue-generating activities, customer-facing, et cetera. So that's a good outcome. Okay. So yeah, and so the other, so we also asked, just sort of gave them a list of things that they could cite for, benefits they've experienced from moving aspects of their business into the cloud. 45 of them said that customer satisfaction rose as a result. So that's, we consider that a pretty important outcome. It's not a majority, but that was, I think, a plurality, was one of the top two responses. And, Neil talks about customer experience and the importance of customer experience and all that. And I think the idea that apps can help deliver a better customer experience shows up a little bit in this data, I think. The fact that a fairly large number are saying it's driving an improved level of customer satisfaction. Okay, so check something. So the last thing we're going to sort of note here is there is a, we asked a lot of questions about how they buy the cloud software. They buy directly from a website, are they sold the software, et cetera. And then we also asked some questions about which entities out there are they most willing to trust in order to add tools. Say they have one app, if they're going to add, or one function, they're going to add more onto that. Who are they most likely to give that multi-app business to? In other words, trust more of their business operation to a single source. What is that single source likely to be? And then we also asked some questions about preference for, buying each function from different providers or having it all be rolled up into one single provider. So I'm going to share some of that. And it sort of points to this sort of SaaS ecosystem starting to train small businesses to self-buy a bit more than I think the conventional wisdom suggests about the small business space. So first of all, 30%, this is the plurality choice. There was other choices like using a marketplace, buying from a salesperson, buying from basically a channel partner like like an accountant, or when accountants are big channel partners for a lot of SaaS tools, and self-service. Self-service was the top function. Now, it's fair to note, a lot of SaaS is set up to be self-service, but the point is that it was the most common way to purchase this software, and I think it sort of signals that there's more of that going on out there than perhaps we realize. And the other thing we asked is how much using a freemium or a free trial matters in sort of getting comfortable with using the software. And we found that 60% use some kind of free way into the software before they actually purchased it. So either they had a freemium version and upgraded from that, or they used like a 30-day free trial, which is a very common thing. And 60% had some form of a free try before you buy approach. So it's a pretty high number. 50% said they would not have purchased without the free trial. In other words, that's the only way they were going to do this, is to buy the software after a free trial. So it's not like, there was a certain number that said, yeah, we would have bought it anyway, but we took advantage of the free trial, why not? And half said that there's no other way they would do it. So that there's a high level of importance to some sort of try before you buy or freemium approach. And then, I alluded to this previously, we asked, okay, let's say you bought an accounting app or point of sale or something to manage your supply chain or whatever it is, and that solution they're adding on solutions, so maybe you're going to have some adjacent service, like maybe it's accounting, maybe it's customer relationship management, maybe it's adding payroll onto something else. Who are you most likely to trust to sort of give more of your business operations over to a single provider? And so we had a bunch of choices. I know it's a little convoluted, but what we really wanted to get to is who has the best opportunity to own that entire customer relationship. And the choices were cloud services providers, IT services providers, telecoms, intermediaries like banks and attorneys and things like that, media companies and agencies. Hate to say it, media companies and agencies were one of the lower choices, down in the single digits, I believe. The highest single response was SaaS providers. Now, that might be just a sort of a sense of, well, that's a natural response. It might imply that there's a bit more trust shared with these companies. It might be that there's less of a obtrusive or intrusive sales interaction with many of these companies. We didn't quite get into the reasons, but those are some hypotheses about why that's the case. But nonetheless, this has consistently been the single largest response. So suggests that there's maybe some work to do for media companies that are trying to sort of evolve into SaaS companies. Maybe there's a branding challenge. Maybe there's a perception challenge. Maybe there's an issue with your sales force not being suited to this. There's a lot of conversations to have around that, and I think we'll probably get into that a little bit with the discussion we're about to have with our panel. So anyway, and the last thing, last important point from this is that we asked, okay, would you rather, as I mentioned before, would you rather just buy your payroll app from one provider and your point of sale from another, and maybe your marketing automation from yet another, and so on and so on? Or would you rather have somebody roll that all up in one place for you and make it easy for you, one bill a month, one subscription, one relationship to manage? And 79% said, yeah, we'd love to do that. What's interesting about this has consistently been a very high number through all four waves. It's varied a bit, but it's always been very high. But then if you look out there, there's very little of this going on, of actually small businesses actually making the decision to put all their eggs in one basket. There's actually very uncommon. So there's an interesting conversation about why that's the case. I think a lot of it has to do with maybe not enough specialization around specific industries, not being everything being suited to that small business and the unique nature of whether it's a dry cleaner or a home services or an attorney or and so on. And what we are seeing is that in vertical solutions, this is happening more commonly. Restaurant companies doing restaurant point of sale that are adding on other marketing and back office solutions for restaurants are getting more of that, complete operating system for the business. That's happening more commonly in verticals than it is sort of across the board in horizontal solutions. I know there's a lot of horizontal all-in-ones in the room, and I'd like to have more conversation about why that's the case. But that's sort of our perception, is that this is happening faster in verticals than it is in horizontal solutions. Anyway, that's really, I'm going to sort of went quickly through that data, but that's kind of what we have. We're going to go into a panel discussion in a minute, kind of to unpack some of these and maybe get some pushback on some of the assumptions that are in the data. But if anyone's interested in learning more about the data, you can come talk to me. I encourage you to follow the LSA Insider blog, which I edit. And Neil is a contributor, I'm a contributor. Mike Boland, who isn't here, writes for us as well. We're also open to guest contributors as well, if you have a particular point of view to share. You can talk to me about that as well. That's not a paid thing, that's just if you have something interesting to contribute, we're open to that. So please keep an eye on that. I also produce a podcast around sort of small business SaaS adoption, talking to companies developing SaaS tools, what problems are they solving, interested in having conversations with thought leaders in the local and small business space. Every episode I make a commitment to make it under 30 minutes, treadmill friendly. So unless you spend an hour on the treadmill, which I don't know what you're all about if you do that. But anyway, so you can find it anywhere you get a podcast. It's indexed everywhere. And finally, Neil mentioned LSA 2020. I won't mention it again, but I'll be involved with that as well. So that's all I had, unless anyone had any quick question about the data. Go ahead. Oh, wait, could we get him a mic?
I was just wondering, Charles, nice presentation, by the way. You said that 50% of the people that you surveyed who ended up buying the apps over through the cloud-based products did so because of a free trial. Do you also know how many people that were offered the free trial, what percentage actually ended up purchasing? In other words, if you offered it
what
to...
was the breakage?
Like if you offered it to 100 people, how many of those people free, how many of those people ended up actually purchasing it after
I'm not
that?
sure if we asked the question in a way that gets to that.
Okay.
We just asked if you did purchase it, was the purchase sort of determined by the free trial? I'm sorry, keep this in front of my face. So I'm not, I have to go back and dig through. I don't think I have the answer to that, to be honest.
Okay,
but that's,
all right.
Maybe we can tweak the question for the next wave to get at that. But we really just wanted to know if the free trial was determinant in their purchase decision.
Sure. I also have a second question, because you also said that the Generation Y were the ones that were actually purchasing these products. So
they're more likely to.
More likely to. As the business transcends from the senior and boomer generation to the children, then are you finding an adaptation at that point where people will go ahead and add now cloud-based services when in the past the business traditionally hadn't?
Well, it's one of the premises of this whole survey, and the reason we think this is so interesting is just that, which is that there's an ongoing, I think we cited some data, and I think it comes originally from Pew, but I think it's based on census data, that like every day 10,000 people in the US reach retirement age. It doesn't mean they're not all small business owners, they're not all retiring,
right.
But it gives you an idea of the scale of that transition. And so as that transition occurs, we're expecting the growth curve to accelerate considerably, because the evidence is very clear that there's an app-first mentality in younger business decision makers. That's clear.
Okay, thank you.
All right.